Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to pick up on just one aspect of the latest TV leadership debate between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, in which they made it clear we're not going to face up to the realities of Brexit anytime soon. And if you don't face up to a problem, that problem will not be solved. This is essentially a video on responsibility in government. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So after catching up with the TV debate last night, where Sunak and Truss both demonstrated why they were probably right to pull out of the last TV debate, there was one response that was not unexpected, but stuck out for me and demonstrated that neither of them would do anything to avoid making as big an arse of Brexit as Boris Johnson did. They were asked directly if the problems at Dover recently were caused by Brexit. They both responded with a definite no. But of course they were caused by Brexit. The CEO of the Port of Dover has made that clear. The reason is that it used to take a few seconds to check a passport. You just literally held it up. Before we left the single market, that's all you did. All French authorities were checking was that you had one. You know, I've been across to France and even that wasn't checked. I've been to France before and they haven't even checked my passport. But now they need to because they've got to have it stamped. As third country citizens, we're only allowed in the EU for 90 days out of every 180. This applies to citizens of all such countries. It's not just us. So how to enforce the rule? Well, officials have to check your passport. They have to see if you've already been in the previous 180 days. Have you already been in the EU and for how long? So they have to check what time you're still allowed. They have to make sure you haven't already exceeded that time. That takes several minutes. Especially if there is no record in there, they've got to check through the whole thing. Once they've determined that you actually do have enough time left, then they've got to make their own mark. You've got to mark your entry point into that country. In order to manage the process as easily as before, you would need at least a few hundred passport booths. There isn't the room for that at Dover. So although the delays were made worse because of the particularly high demand and some French officials being late to work, the delays are always there. Brexiteer Ben Habib has tried to say because the backlog has cleared, it proves it had nothing to do with Brexit. Now you can understand someone going along with, oh yeah, the backlog's clear. Oh, it can't be Brexit because it was Brexit be all the time. Because that's what he's saying. If it were Brexit, he said the delays would always be there. But the delays are there still. They're always there. It's just that a few days ago it got especially bad. But if you try and pass through Dover today, when there's no news of particularly bad delays, and you'd had experience of passing through before Brexit, you will notice the extra delays. And those delays run into several hours. Now, as the people who run the port authorities in Kent observed, you are always going to have these delays because it now takes longer to carry out the checks. It's that simple. And speaking of simple, what Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, said is also wrong. He said the French don't actually need to carry these checks out at all. He is wrong on two counts. Firstly, it's a rule of the EU that the time you're in the EU is monitored to make sure you do not exceed those 90 days. So of course it has to be checked and stamped. But second, before the single market came into being, you had passport checks anyway. So even if the single market had never existed, there would still have been checks that take longer than since the creation of the single market. You know, countries around the world tend to have a habit of checking passports. And whatever they're checking for takes longer than the few seconds to just flash it at them. There will be some countries where you can do that, I'm sure, where they don't care. But, you know, I mean, I don't travel much. I've said that. I'm not really a traveller. But my parents were. So when I was growing up, we went abroad to quite a lot of countries. So in my youth, I've been around a lot before the single market was created. Passport control was always a memorable and lengthy experience, always. And although the problem can't be made to go away while we insist on being a third country, it can be improved. The way to solve or at least alleviate a problem always begins with correctly identifying the problem. If you misdiagnose the problem, then you will fail to apply the correct solution. It's that simple. Now, I will accept that it is possible to publicly deny a problem, but if you're privately seized of it, work behind the scenes to fix it anyway. In other words, if it's a public relations disaster to admit to the problem because it's your fault, then you just deny the problem, but you still work on the solution. But what we have here is denying the problem to the public and to themselves. Like Truss and Sunak are taking the view that this was the fault of the French. This allows them not only to stoke up their xenophobic support, but also gives them an excuse to put in zero effort to solving the real problem. It's an irresponsibly childish attitude to have. Even if the fault were partly or wholly others, it's still not the right attitude for a government to take. The government should be expected to solve problems to make our lives easier. That's their job. It's not their job to work out whose fault it is. It's their job to solve the problems. The most liberating event in my life, and I remember it clearly, was when I realised I had an epiphany. I realised that if I had a problem, then it was up to me to solve it. If the problem affected me, it was up to me to solve it. Like a lot of people prior to that point, I was responsible. Like if something was my fault, I would absolutely try and fix it. But if it's someone else's fault, I would whine about the someone else. I'd blame the someone else. Why should I fix it? It's their fault. And one day I realised that if some arsehole screws you over, they're not really motivated to put things right for you. So who's the one who suffers? Me, not them. You know, on account of them being arseholes. So I shifted my attitude from working out whether, like the flow chart was initially, whose fault is it? Is it mine? Right, I'll fix it. If it's not, some bugger else should. I removed that completely. My attitude shifted to working out how I could put things right. Don't matter whose fault it was. No longer mattered to me whose fault something was. I used that energy to work on solutions to get myself out of the mess. From that point on, life got a whole lot easier. Because I took control. And I expect the same of a government. In this case, the fault is this hard Brexit government. But it doesn't matter who is to blame. We are the ones with the problem. So we are the ones who need to apply a solution. But they won't. Never mind the whole debate where both Sunak and Truss trashed the reputation of their own party and government again. My main takeaway from this is that they will not take responsibility. Highlights a couple of things. First, that the crucial voters are not aware of the damage Brexit is causing. I'm going to have to keep mentioning this. There are people who complain not only about the Tories' Brexit stance, but also Labour's, because it doesn't make sense. But everything makes sense. Everything makes sense when you're looking at it from the right angle. If something doesn't appear to make sense, it's because you're missing something. The Tories and their client media have to downplay the impact of Brexit at all costs. When we left the EU, I thought it would only be a matter of a fairly short time before it all got found out, and then that'd be it. You know, we could start moving in a better direction again. Brexit was going to be so damaging that there'd be no way to preserve the lies. But COVID and now the war in Ukraine have provided a lot of cover for Brexit. There's no point pretending otherwise. The lay of the land has completely changed. Without these catastrophes, the impact of Brexit would have been undeniable. The Brexit debate right now in this country would have been unrecognisable because you wouldn't have been able to fall back on COVID or Ukraine crisis. Now what Brexit is doing is making a bad situation worse. When it is one factor in our national disasters, it is harder for the public to pick apart the individual parts without having to explain to them. You know, because experts will say, oh, this was caused by Brexit and COVID, or this was caused by Brexit and the war in Ukraine, or this was caused by Brexit and shortage of microchips. You know, whatever it is, well, itself is COVID. Whatever it is, the government will just say, oh, it's not Brexit, it's this other thing. They'll just point to the other thing. And for a lot of crucial voters for the general election, the people that are explaining things to them, because people need things explained to them, and the people that what's explaining it to them, it's the Sun, the Mail, the Telegraph and the Express. Sometimes the BBC, but they're playing ball with the government as well. Sunak and Truss are denying that Brexit even caused a problem, not because they're deluded. Neither of them are. I know you might think Liz Truss is because she's a bit thick, but she has shown when she was Trade Secretary that she understands the problem. She wrote them down in a letter very clearly. She gets it. No, they're doing it because this is the narrative they have to take in order to appeal to those whom they are appealing for promotion to number 10. And my second takeaway from this is that they're not going to seek to improve the situation. Because they didn't have to deny the problem fully. They could have said, look, you know, it was a bit of a one-off. It's not happening all the time, but it could happen again in the future. It will happen again in the future. So they could have said, look, the problem highlighted was that there weren't enough officials checking passports. As Prime Minister, I would expand the facilities at Dover for passport checking so that we can have more officials working to meet demand. If you do that, you're still ignoring the fact that there's no way of expanding enough to meet the extra checks required. But you are at least saying that there's something we can do to make the situation better. It would have been an answer from a prospective Prime Minister that indicates they intend to responsibly solve problems. You know, show leadership. What we got was the easy answer from both of them. Blame someone or something else and do nothing. That's the government we're going to get. That was Boris Johnson's attitude to government, and look where it got us. And it looks very much like this will be the attitude of our next Prime Minister as well. You know, depending on your point of view, this could be good or bad. It's bad in that people will continue to suffer, and from more than a pain in the arse delay to their holidays, because that's just the media focus. It's by no means the most serious consequence of massive queues at our ports. But it's good in that people will see that they are still suffering and might put their tick in the right box at the next general election. You know, I keep saying it's not enough for the government to lose the trust of the public. The alternative still has to win their trust, but it is increasingly difficult to see how the Conservatives are going to dodge the bullet again at the next election. Problem is they don't have to trigger it for some time. That is always the problem. We're only halfway through. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.